Well, good morning. My name is Sheila Banks, and I'm an educator in Louisiana. And a little bit about my background. I am the product of the Louisiana public school system in two ways. One is as a student, and two is as the daughter of not one, but two public educators who each dedicated over 37 years into the public school system. Where I do my work is in Jefferson Parish in Louisiana, and Jefferson Parish is the district that surrounds New Orleans. So you can kind of get a glimpse of where we are. We're a very large district in our state. We are one of the largest districts in the state, and we have a diverse population of students. The school where my teaching takes place is John Ehret High School, and John Ehret High School is located in Marrero, Louisiana. In fact, if you stand on the top of our buildings, you can see the French Quarter. So we're not far removed from New Orleans. We have typical teenage students. They're typical high schoolers. Their personalities range from the shy and timid to the completely outrageous. And I swear that today's generation of students were born with an iPad sticking out of their hip. And with all these students, John Ehret High School has a very large population of 1,800 students, which is big for a Louisiana school. And these kids, as diverse as they are in their personalities, they also come to us with an extremely diverse, set of learning needs. So, oftentimes it is a challenge to tailor instruction that is meaningful and purposeful for them. So, as a science educator, it would be so easy for me to stand in front of you and say that to incorporate the Common Core standards, I snapped my fingers and it magically happened. We know that's not true. I would love to tell you that I also snapped my fingers and, in a matter of weeks, these high school students were reading and writing on the college level and, we're all going home. We all know that's not true, okay? That's not even how my stories about the Common Core begin. My story with the Common Core begins when I was asked to attend a training for the Literacy Design Collaborative as a science educator. And what you have to understand about science educators is that we are a unique breed of teachers. For years and for decades, science educators were known for their content. We are content experts. And it's that love of our content that actually brought us into education. What a science teacher wants to see is her students or his students being scientists. That's the most threatening thing to us. So when you send me to a training as a science educator and tell me that for me to meet the Common Core state standards, I'm following the literacy strand, that was mind-blowing. Okay? That is truly mind-blowing, and that's the shift that science educators are facing today. How do you expect us to, we're not willing to let go of our content. There's no way. I am not going to let go of my physics content and spend time reading all these books. How do you expect me to let go of my content and impart all these literacy standards? Later on today, I'm going to tell you a story about a young man named Charles. And Charles actually showed me the power of having more rigorous lessons, having more meaningful content, having more purposeful discourse in the science classroom. But I digress. So, just bear with me for just one moment. So like I said, science educators, and I'm an LDC teacher. I'm considered to be an LDC expert teacher. So it was a major shift to incorporate those literacy standards into the classroom. Now, ever since I've been an LDC teacher and I've been involved in the Common Core, people have questioned me about, two major things. I call them my essential questions, for lack of a better word. My first question that I'm always asked, and I get asked this by Louisiana teachers, by teachers across the nation, by everyone, is, and this question really blows my mind, Sheila, how did you get those students on board with Common Core? Because my students not only did the lessons, they excelled in them and they owned them. So I get asked all the time, how did that happen? And I really like that question because it makes me think about the word relationships. And as an educator, I've always said that teaching is synonymous with the word relationships. When you build a relationship with students, you know what they need, you assess their needs, and you work with them, and you work on their weaknesses. You have to have that relationship with them. And with me and my students, we had a fantastic relationship. We really had a mutual respect for each other. And by the way, this is Charles right here, and you'll meet more about this young man, in just a few moments. But so my students had this trust with me. We had a built-in trust system. I trusted them to do what was right, and they trusted me that I was not going to waste their time on instruction that didn't matter, because that is not my style. I'm also not the kind of teacher that ever said, you're going to do this because I said so. So that is not at all how I got the Common Core to work in my classroom. They trusted me. They knew that if I was going to spend time on these standards, it must mean something. So the time comes, I'm in the classroom, and it's time to implement these standards. I went straight from training, I went full throttle. I completely revamped the learning in my classroom so that we could touch on these Common Core standards. So I'm sitting in the classroom thinking, okay, hey guys, we're going to do a lot more reading and writing in this science class. You don't really get an applause from students when you tell them that. In fact, you kind of have to stand back and wait for them to throw things at you. Okay, so I'm getting these blank stares, and they're just like, okay. So they were a little interested, definitely not sold. So I'm thinking, I got to use my teacher brain. Okay, I need these kids hooked into this. I know, I'm going to show them the standards. So I actually showed them the college and career ready standards, and they were interested. Okay, yeah, I can see why we need to know that. I've always thought about going to college, but there's no way I can do that stuff. So again, they're intrigued, definitely not sold. So now it's time to teach. And like I said, I'll go full throttle with things. I had to dive into it. So then I showed them the module. I said, okay, if I show them the LDC module and tell them what they're going to be doing, that's it. They're hooked in. So I showed them the module. No, not sold. That looks great. Okay, yeah, we might have some fun with that, but still not sold. So, I have to do my thing. I have to teach. So it took getting into that very first task, which is so appropriately named task engagement. It took getting into that task and getting into the meat of the work that I saw changes happen, and then ding ding, sold. Okay, and at the time we were working on an LDC module that centered on bridges. The students were responsible for researching forces and structures of bridges. They had to collaborate with each other in teams to design and build and test a bridge, and they had to write a formal lab report on the college level and turn that into me. This was even more relevant to them because at the time when we started this LDC module, one of our bridges, the Crescent City Connection, was in the midst of a huge political debate. And these kids were nearly voting age, so it was already meaningful and relevant to them. And what I saw happen was just amazing. You know how teachers have that problem of, oh, Johnny is skipping class, and little Mary hasn't, been here for a week. I kind of had the opposite problem in the classroom. They wanted to stay in there all day. They wanted to bring their friends in because they were so proud. They were so bought into this work. They were proud of it, and they wanted to share their experiences with everything else. So that's really how I got the students hooked in on the standards and how I got them on board. It took actually getting into the meat of things and teaching them and getting them engaged in something that is meaningful and purposeful. And that just meant the world to them, and of course it meant the world to me. So my second essential question that people ask me, and I've been asked this all the time, I've even been on a stage before I've been asked, Sheila, what was your aha moment? How did you know that this was working? And that is a really difficult question because my response was, I don't know. I don't know how I know it was working, but something told me, okay, this is working. So remember the young man I showed you, Charles? Charles is a student that showed me the power of how the Common Core was working for him and how he changed instruction in my classroom. So let me paint a picture of Charles for you. Charles, obviously he loves sports. You can see him in his picture. He's wearing his sports jersey. And Charles is he's over 6 feet tall, big, bulky male. And you know how our teenagers these days walk around with those big, giant headphones on their ear? Every day it was a struggle for him to not walk into the classroom with the music blaring in his ears, kind of, very nonchalant about the lessons, or so I thought. Other teachers had kind of, he came with a warning label to me. And he really did. So other teachers, kind of illustrated, you gotta stay on him. He's not gonna be interested in the content. He's not really gonna do the work. He doesn't have good math skills, and you're trying to do science instruction in a physics class, and don't get your hopes up. So I took that with a grain of salt. So we're working on this module, the one about the bridges, and days go by, a couple weeks go by, and I'm thinking that the students are going through the motions. We're completing task after task. We've done the active reading, we've done researching, we're in the process of transitioning to writing, and like I said, I'm thinking that they're going through the motions. And then lo and behold, one day I'm at my desk, very rare occasion, and Charles approaches me with the booming headphones on his ear. So I was a little bit skeptical. And he asked me, Ms. Banks, what are we going to do for our next module? And what Charles doesn't know is that in my head I'm thinking, what do you mean next? We're in the middle of this one and we haven't even finished, and graduation is a few weeks away. What do you mean next? But I was intrigued, so I let him talk. I said, well, tell me what's on your mind, Charles. And he said, well, I was thinking for our next one, okay, we get a baseball, right? And we take this bat and we hit the ball and we measure how high it went and how far it went. And then we take a different bat, but we have to use the same ball, Ms. Banks. And we have to make sure that every time we hit that bat, hit the ball with the bat, that we have the same force hitting it. Oh, and here's a list of websites that we can use for our next web quest. Oh, here's this book that I found. It's all about baseball and trajectories and all this. And when we write the lab reports, we can include this and include that. So, I finished the conversation with him and I thank him for his contribution for the class. It didn't dawn on me at that moment what had actually transpired. It took me, sitting in my room during my planning period to realize, wait a second. Charles just basically designed his own LDC model. Charles just became a scientist, because in that conversation, he just identified an independent variable. He just identified variables and controls. He knew that it took some sort of active reading and research to get through a scientific study. He knew that the end result of a study is some written piece of literature. Oh my goodness, this student who people claim on his warning label said not interested in content, this not interested student just became a scientist. Wow. Like I said, as a science educator, that's what we want. We love to hear our students say, I'm going to go into the field of science when I finish high school. And that happens almost no time. It does not happen. So to hear this student say that, in that moment I realized, oh my goodness, that's the power of making instruction meaningful and purposeful and rigorous. But before we did things like this, the rigor wasn't as high as the Common Core required it to be, so my kids did not know what they were capable of. So as time progressed, and after his situation, I start looking at the other students. Well, is this working anywhere else? And I'm hearing their discourse, like they're actually using scientific language and designing research and everything, and that was just phenomenal. So that's how I knew the Common Core was working. My students let me know that it was working. And they never raised their hand and say, Ms. Banks, this is working. That doesn't happen. But their actions showed me that they're working. And I love these pictures. This is, we had many tasks in that module, and so this is them completing a lot of those things. So that question of rigor has been, in the discourse of educators, especially in Louisiana. Let me set you in the framework. There are still educators in our state who have an emerging knowledge of the Common Core. And one statement that I keep hearing is, if our kids can't do the work that we have for them now, how can we expect them to do something more rigorous? Charles is one of those examples. He didn't know what he was capable of until I had higher expectations for him, until the work got more meaningful, until it got more rigorous. I don't want my story about Charles to be unique. That's the problem with that story, it's unique. I want Charles' story to be ubiquitous. I want every teacher in Louisiana, every teacher in a Common Core state, every teacher in this nation to have their own Charles story. That's how we know that this is working. In order to do that, though, we need support. Our teachers right now, they need support and they need understanding. On the district level, we need district personnel who can not only instruct teachers as to how to develop these modules and how to incorporate the standards, we need personnel who can actually step into the classroom and model what those shifts in instruction look like. Right now, our teachers are confused and they are doubtful that they can do this thing. But if they see it, when they see it happening, they'll know that they have the strength to do this. Those shifts are another thing that we need support in. We need our school-based administrators, we need our district personnel to know what these shifts looks like, because the Common Core is not punitive. We don't need to take punitive action because we're going to see instruction that looks drastically different from our traditional modes of teaching. And we want to make sure that we don't penalize teachers for that. We need to let teachers develop the instruction that is appropriate for them and for their kids. We need to have a local control over things like that. The Common Core standards tells us what we expect our kids to know. It did not say how to teach it. That is a local decision. The teacher knows her students best, principals know their teachers best, districts knows their schools best. So let's not just profess that autonomy is great, let's make the autonomy happen, because we have to have instruction that is suitable for our students that actually exemplifies those standards. So, and I'm gonna end my discussion with one last word, it's optimism. We have to go forward with this, and we have to know that our teachers are capable, our